we both ended up going up to Moffett Field at the Marine Detachment up there in Marine Barracks, Moffett Field Naval Air Station. And so that's when Neil and I first met. And then, of course, we ended up leaving Moffett and going on to Curtis.
Tell me the story about your Curtis experience.
No, the Curtis experience, after being in Moffett Field for, let's see, it must have been about a year and a half, because it was prior to Korea starting. There was a special ALMAR that came out requesting people for special duty afloat. And so several of us put in for that assignment. In the interim, of course, Korea started, so everybody forgot about that. And the people that had had prior infantry experience, of course, they were gone the very next day after Korea started, down to Camp Pendleton and then on to Korea. And then suddenly, within that week, all of a sudden orders came in, special duty afloat, and we ended up going down to San Diego, where a detachment was formed. And of course, scuttlebutt being that could be anything from forming of the Raiders to whatever. But anyway, we ended up going through sea school and eventually aboard ship. And of course, by this time, found out it was for the atom bomb tests over in Eniwetok in Marshall Islands. And so, of course, aboard ship, we were, after completion of sea school at MCRD San Diego, we boarded a train in San Diego, the whole unit, detachment, up to, where was it, to Port Chicago, or not Port Chicago, Hunters Point, by San Francisco, aboard ship. And from there we proceeded on to Port Chicago, where, in my best recollections, they picked up the components and then also the scientists that were involved boarded ship. And then from there, of course, over to Eniwetok.
Do you remember the first time that you met Ambrosio Guillen?
Yes, basically, I'd been at Moffett Field, I want to say approximately 6 months. He, in turn, came up from Camp Pendleton. And I remember him telling me that he'd appeared in that, in the background, this movie Sands of Iwo Jima. He had participated in that. But anyway, he came up there, and it seems like he was in the next bed rack next to me in the squad bay. So we just started going out on liberty together. And I remember on one occasion there, of course, he had told me that his, can't remember if his mother or father, or I believe his father was Mexican and his mother was Indian. And then his father had ridden with Pancho Villa, and of course, being a young kid, well, that was quite impressive. And but at the very first, somebody would come up and start speaking Spanish to him, and he'd right away tell him not to do that. And then afterwards, he told me that his father had always told him that whenever you're with somebody, in the event they don't understand the language, don't speak to them, because they will feel that you're speaking of them or whatever. And then, like I said, we started going to Liberty together. And eventually he got the nickname of Squeaky because he and I had ended up going down to San Jose one evening and viewed a movie. And why we went to that particular movie, I have no idea. It was probably just going to a movie to get out of the weather or whatever. But anyway, it was the Cinderella movie, the Walt Disney animated version. And that particular one, the mouse, or the mouse in there, that one of the lead characters, looked exactly like Ambrosio. And mainly because of, I keep wanting to say Squeaky, because anyway, had hair that sort of was wiry and stuck up a little bit, where most of the rest of us had flat tops. Squeaky, his hair was short, but it sort of stuck up there in the back. Plus he had that nose, prominent Indian nose. And so anyway, from that point on, we just started calling him Squeaky, which of course he didn't object to. And then we'd go on Liberty together. I remember over in Pearl Harbor, we went on Liberty on one occasion. And we all went out, and after 2 or 3 beers, I was ready to go back to board ship there, figuring I'd had enough. And Squeak was with me. Well, the rest of the group wanted Squeaky to remain with them, and I was going to go back. And Squeaky told them, he says, no, he says, if Ed goes, we came out together, if he goes back, I go back. And that's the way he was. After the Curtis, we all came back to the recruit depot, were troop handlers for a short time in separation battalion, then later on became drill instructors. He was in a different battalion than I, but we'd see one another periodically. In the interim, of course, I got married, so needless to say, we didn't go on Liberty, of course, as we had before, but I'd see him periodically. And then I ended up going aboard ship again, a carrier, and he in turn remained at the recruit depot, and within months, of course, ended up going to Korea. And it was by accident I happened to pick up, can't recall, a magazine, a military magazine, and I became aware, of course, he'd gotten killed and won the Congressional Medal of Honor from Korea.
How did you feel when you saw that?
Well, of course, I always felt sort of guilty in the fact that I'd went aboard ship, and the rest of them, of course, had went.
Did you ever feel like you should have been there yourself?
Yeah.
What did you do when you saw the citation? What was the first thing that you did?
No, I don't recall. I remember, of course, telling various ones at the time had gotten off the ship, and I was an instructor at sea school after DI school again, and telling all my friends, of course, and then of course relatives at home, and then periodically various ones I'd run across. And then even years later, when I was a drill instructor again down San Diego, I ended up running into a couple of people that were with him or nearby when it happened. But that was about it, I guess.
Billy Barnett, right?
Pardon?
Billy Barnett?
Oh yeah, Bill. He was aboard ship. In fact, I talked to him periodically, and he was one of them I was talking about it. He ended up going to Korea, and of course he was wounded pretty bad. In fact, he ended up receiving a medical.
Going back to the Curtis, describe your memory of the first shot that you saw, the first bomb.
I remember we were, well, first of all, I remember whenever they would, the compartments aboard ship that we would stand guard over. They had a list of names, people could enter a certain scientists could enter one and could not enter another, and so forth. And then prior to getting ready for the blast, of course, they'd bring all the components up, put them on the smaller landing craft, and they'd have Marines standing at port arms with M1s, and then they would load that onto there, take them over to the island, set it up. And I remember on one occasion there, I'm standing there at port arms, all of a sudden I got hit in the head with something and couldn't, luckily we wore pith helmets, and it was one of these monkey paws. Whenever the ship is going to tie up or whatever, they throw these lines over with this monkey paw on it, and then it gets the larger rope and pulls it over. And of course it was by accident, but needless to say, startled. But anyway, on the blast, in the event that you had goggles, you were able to view the blast. If you didn't, which I didn't the first one or two, you had to bury your head in your arms and count, and then you were able to look up. But even in so doing, it was just like a big searchlight hitting you. And then the latter one, I think it was, I had goggles, so I was able to view. And what it appeared, it's right at dusk, but there's still slight darkness. And all of a sudden, boom, everything just lights up. And then, boom, and then, of course, you see the mushroom forming.
Did you ever talk to your shipmates about that?
I don't know, probably did. I can't recall. I know afterwards, of course, you'd have to, they'd check you for radiation. And as I recall, I think they destroyed the clothing and so forth.
If you could go back in time and watch that blast again, would you?
Well, I don't know, probably so, if I was ordered to do so. I know since then I lost my two twin sons to cancer, but they checked my medical records and they don't feel like I had enough radiation for that.
That was going to be my next question.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these guys are saying that the cancer that they've been, the ailments they've been having are a direct result of the blast, of this radiation. And how do you feel about that? Do you feel that, and in your situation is actually a prime example, your children both getting cancer, do you think that's a direct result of the exposure to radiation?
I don't know. I know their mother ended up, of course, dying exactly a year before the latter son did, and her family had cancer, and so who knows. Doctors claim I didn't have enough. I know when we were coming back from the tests and just right outside of San Francisco, as you're entering the harbor there, that's got to be about the roughest stretch of water there is because of all the ground swells. And I was standing guard over the pyrotechnics locker where they keep supposedly the hot stuff, and you're not supposed to touch the bulkhead. And here I am, 19, 20 years of age, thinking about what I'm going to do when I go home on leave back to Denver. And all of a sudden, here's this wave coming right up at me. And needless to say, I grabbed hold of a handle, and after it was all over, back to normal duties. And so, who knows?
To kind of go more off the Ambrosio Guillen story. And your personal relationship with him, can you tell one story, one moment that you guys had together that you'll never forget?
Well, that incident on Liberty, of course, and then him telling me about his father with Pancho Villa, and they're just a true friend. Of course, in the military, you have a lot of good buddies and so forth, but then you have those that I can see why he won the Congressional Medal of Honor. He was those that really developed and devoted and cared for doing his duties, not only that of the lower rank individual, but then later on after he gained a little rank, being responsible not only for his duties, but taking care of his troops.
One thing I'm kind of curious about, and the documentary that we're doing about Ambrosio Guillen, more than just Guillen, it's about heroism. And we feel that Ambrosio Guillen is a hero, but to be able to hear it from you, I think it's just going to be that much more powerful. Why is Ambrosio Guillen a hero?
No, because he was on this outpost and to defend that outpost, and then when the enemy made their charge and so forth, he was able to withhold and maintain that, and I not being there, but as I've been told by others, that even though he was wounded, he bound himself with comm wire, which is usually there are plenty of around an area there where there's troops and so forth. But anyway, he bound himself and still was able to defend, ward off the enemy, and do his job.
Who else was there that you know?
I don't know. Like I say, this one individual, later on, I ended up going through DI school, and I wouldn't even recognize his name if I heard it. But he was telling me that, in fact, that they were in the process of bringing him off that from what he was awarded the Medal of Honor for, and it was while he was being evacuated on a stretcher that they got hit by a direct mortar that actually killed him. So whether or not that be true or not, I don't know.
Wow. How many people are still alive today that you know that come to these reunions, that were with you? I mean, Neil Hoing being one of them, but when's the last time that you've seen all the rest of those guys?
No, of course I haven't been to I went to the first and the second, so I'm just trying to remember, 98 or whenever it was. Of course, Jack Cruz, who passed away, Keith Gundy, I think although he's not here, and the last one that I went to, there's several. This one, however, Neil Hoing's the only one. Then I was looking forward to Rich Wegner. I wasn't in the Marine Corps with him. However, on the police department, I ended up working with him on my second transfer when I worked traffic accident investigation. I worked with him.
What was your MO when you were in the Marine Corps?
You know, up and through it, including E8, I was always primary infantry MOS. And then prior to making E9, I was in the reserve in a military police unit, which consisted of all policemen. The officer in charge was another policeman that I worked with at the police academy. He ended up retiring as a full colonel. But anyway, he was the officer in charge when he was a major. Then I was the NCOIC. And then when I made E9, the sergeant major of the unit had to leave because of time in service. So the colonel selected me, even though I was a master gunnery sergeant, to be the sergeant major, in which I fulfilled that billet the last 3 years I was in the reserve.
Okay. If you could go back in time and redo your military service, what would you do differently?
Well, not really a lot. Of course, I'm proud of the 3 different tours that I had as a drill instructor. In fact, even on the police department, when I first joined, they have what they call a recruit DI. So it was between a Marine lieutenant and a Army captain, myself, as to who would be the class DI company commander. And of course, they conducted close order drill. I conducted close order drill, and having been a drill instructor, I was the class DI company commander, and they were platoon leaders. And then 4 or 5 years later, after I had a little time on the police department, I was selected to go to the academy and be the academy DI, and I trained the people as far as inspection, wearing of uniforms, close order drill, and whatever to do with the military aspect of police work.
If you could meet Ambrosi again right now, if you could come back for one day, what would you say to him?
That is, congratulations, job well done.
Simple, but
Mm-hmm.
very, very nice.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of person, and then, I mean, we're cutting this all together in little parts here, but if you could describe his character to me a little bit, what kind of a person would you say he was?
No, just outstanding. He had respect and consideration for others, and everything he did, he excelled in. He excelled in things, and yet did so without going behind your back or being a backstabber along that line. Just an outstanding individual that you'd want to be with you in combat or whatever. Somebody that you could depend upon.
Well, perfect. Perfect. Do you have any other questions, Sasha?
All I can think of. It's just deep as is. It's excellent.
Alrighty. And I have a few other questions as far as the Curtis goes. What was the most intense moment of the Curtis that you can remember, aside from the bomb, of course?
I know there's several of them. I mean, like I say, when you were standing watch, naturally there were 24 hours a day on the morning watch. At that time I smoked, and of course I quit, about 20 years ago. But anyway, at that time I smoked. You weren't supposed to smoke on watch, and needless to say, on morning watch, well, every time, once in a while, you'd stink of smoke, and it had to be one of those occasions, and here comes the officer of the deck around, one of the Marine officers, caught me by surprise, and of course I just switched the cigarette. I was able to switch it to my left hand, drop it behind sort of a beam, and slowly report my post and so forth. And then he went on, and needless to say, I put the cigarette out. And, he didn't know it, and I, of course, learned my lesson not to do it. So that the only thing I can think of at the time I was, what, 18, 19, 20 years of age, so that it was after then got my first tattoo, one and only. I guess that's about it. Can't think of anything offhand.
Well, that's perfect. That's perfect. You have any? So you told the story about Ambrose again when you guys went on Liberty, and was he? Yeah, and he had told you this thing about speaking Spanish in front of his friends, and of course not leaving you there. But actually, we can cut the cameras actually.